my name's Andrea Brooke, and I'm one of the district's STEM coaches, and I'm happy to be moderating tonight's Parent University on cultural competency. It's an introduction to cultural competence and talking about race. And we have hosting this event tonight our District Diversity and Equity Coordinator, Michelle Curtin. And so I'm excited for you to meet Michelle and for her to host us this evening. So Michelle, take it away.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for having me. And I have to say, thank you, Andrea, for spending this time with us. Today is Andrea's daughter's 12th birthday. So thank you for taking your time to moderate this presentation this evening.
Well, I'm excited to be here. And if any questions pop up along the way, please post them in the chat and I will be sure to keep an eye on that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So as you can see on the screen is my name, Michelle Curtin, and also my email address. If you have any questions or would like to collaborate or whatever the case may be, please feel free to contact me through that email address. And you can also find it through the school's website as well. So let's just review some of our objectives and our outcomes. So today, I'm just going to briefly introduce myself and my role in the district, and then just take you through a very brief introduction to cultural competency, and also exploring 10 ways to teach and talk to kids about race. So I like to think of this presentation as an entry point to begin thinking about cultural competency, as well as 10 ways that you as a parent can begin having conversations about race with your children. So at any time, again, like Andrea already stated, if you have any questions along the way, just post them right in the chat and Andrea will get those questions to me right away, okay? So first, who am I? Well, I am a multitude of things. Most importantly, I am a mother and I am a wife to three beautiful children that you see there on the screen with my husband. I have been a history teacher at Lake Orion High School for 17 years, and I've had the pleasure of serving as the district's diversity and equity coordinator for 3 years. And I also advise a pretty awesome club called Cultural Outreach, which is our diversity club. We do a lot of different activities and events throughout the high school, as well as the community, that focus on acceptance and respect of all people. So I'm very proud of that club and the different roles that I have the opportunity to play in the district. So without further delay, I'd like to get started with our presentation. So first, let me say that, again, this is kind of an entry point and just an introduction to cultural competence. If you were to Google this word, you would find, if you were to Google these words, pardon me, you would find a lot of different information. So for the sake of our conversation and our starting point, I am just going to offer you kind of a well-rounded definition of cultural competence. And it's more so of an opportunity to think about yourself and your own awareness and how you're showing up in the world in terms of how you view yourself and also how you view others. And more importantly, how you view yourself and others, especially people who may be different from you, how you view those relationships. So again, you may find a lot of different information about cultural competence, but for tonight, to drive our conversation, these are just a few statements I'd like to offer to you. So what is cultural competence? Well, it's being aware of one's own worldview. Most importantly, what do I believe in? What perspective do I put out there in the world? Developing positive attitudes towards cultural differences, thinking about others in a positive way, gaining knowledge of different cultural practices and worldviews, and more importantly, and I think this is the most important aspect of this definition that I'm giving you, this working definition, is developing skills for communication and interaction across cultures. So today I'd like to just offer some little tidbits and little information to help you as you interact with different people, as parents, as whatever your occupation may be, just as a human being in general. How can you develop these skills to communicate and interact across cultures other than your own? So that's what I'm here today to do. And again, this is a starting point, and I'd like for you to think of this whole idea of cultural competence and talking about race is more of a marathon and not a sprint. It's ongoing. It's not something you read a book, You watch a presentation, and then, the next day, you're completely culturally competent. No, it's actually an ongoing process that even I myself practice each day to make sure that I'm as culturally competent as I can be. So first, I'd like to look at some underlying cultural competency principles. So first and foremost is trust and respect for diversity, equity, fairness, and social justice. So I'm not going to read this to you verbatim, this checklist, but I'd like for you to think about ways that you can be culturally competent by thinking of your attitude, your skills and knowledge, and also understanding and respecting the histories, cultures, languages, and traditions of diverse communities. So what I've done here on the screen, you'll see a list of statements, and the beginning words in these statements are bold and italicized. I like to consider those to be action words. Action in a sense of something that you can personally do to ensure and work to a level of being culturally competent. And when it's intentional and you're really focused on showing up and being the best person that you can be, because accepting and respecting all people is important to you, it's something that you could focus on intentionally. So as you go through this list and read it yourself, and as I just briefly speak about all of these points, I want you to think about what you can do when you leave here today. What are some intentional things that you can do that are actionable and meaningful to help you develop your cultural competency? So values is the first word that we see there. So how can you show that you value the differences in the interests of various youth? How can you show that even as a parent, or again, whatever your occupation may not be, how can you show respect and differences in families' home lives? And we'll get to, when we get to our slide and we're discussing the 10 ways to talk and teach your children about race, that is a very important sticking point. How can you teach and show your children how to respect differences in family home lives and even yourself? How can you focus on building different ways of knowing and the expertise found in different cultures and communities? So how can I look at someone else as not being different, as kind of not turning me off and not being interested, to it being a point of, I want to learn from you. What do you know that I don't know? Our expertise may be different, but you're an expert in your area, I'm an expert in my area. And even though maybe racially or our ethnicity, our religious beliefs may be different, we both bring expertise to the table that we can learn from. How can we understand that recognizing that diversity contributes to the richness of our society? So recognizing and understanding that diversity isn't something that is anti-community, but is actually pro-community, that can lead to developing very important social bonds that can make a community even stronger. Understands that you understand in a strong sense of cultural identity and belonging is central to developing a positive self-esteem. If you are in a community where there aren't very many people of a certain race or a certain group, and they're looked upon as, oh, that's just that different group, oh, that's a smaller group, that's a minority group, they're there, okay, that's fine. But if we're not really identifying and respecting those differences, and we're not allowing them to be a part of the community in a real meaningful way, then that is definitely damaging to their self-esteem. So understanding that embracing and considering and celebrating various cultural identities is very important. And I think this point of identifying and challenging is one of the most important aspects on this checklist. And that is, it's very uncomfortable to think about identifying and challenging your own cultural assumptions. And that's where the growth comes in. And as we progress along in this presentation, I am going to present some ideas to you to how you can look at all of this, valuing, respecting, building, recognizing, and understanding, but also identifying and challenging your own cultural assumptions. And that's where, again, coming out of your comfort zone comes into play. And then finally, demonstrating an ongoing commitment to developing your own cultural competence. Again, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's a day-to-day process even for me. And I know even as a woman of color, I never enter spaces like I'm the expert on everything that deals with ethnicity and race. I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm trying to be the best, most culturally competent person that I can be by learning and interacting with others. So again, all of these words I feel are action items and actionable things. And I would like to present, as we go along in the presentation, some ideas for you to think about and consider at some point to again, help us be more culturally competent. So with that in mind, I'd like for us to look at this pyramid. And I really enjoy this pyramid because I'm a visual learner and I like to look at visuals to help me really think about what it is that I'm trying to consider. If you're interested in receiving a copy of this, if you go to projectready.com and you can see that in the lower right-hand corner, you can visit that site and there's some great resources dealing with diversity and equity as well. So let's think about some components of becoming culturally competent. So I like to introduce a term called cultural humility. So if you look at this pyramid, the foundation of growing and the foundation of understanding is your cultural competence, right? And gaining cultural knowledge and developing cultural self-awareness. So first and foremost, it's looking at yourself and thinking about who you are. What is my culture? And how does it influence the ways I view and interact with others? So that's a wonderful starting point to have this conversation. And this is a personal journey. So this is a conversation that you can have by yourself. It's a conversation I've had with myself. Who am I and how do I show up in the world and how do I interact with others? So that's the kind of the foundational work in thinking about yourself and how you relate to others. And then building on that is gaining more cultural knowledge. So, what are other cultures and what strengths do they have? So, that's a good way to begin to challenge some of the stereotypes or beliefs that you may have if you have those, and thinking, okay, instead of looking at someone who's different than myself, and even kind of teaching my children that way just because I view people this way and my children may take on my beliefs because we are their first role models, and they kind of imitate and mimic what we do. What are some things that I can do to put out more of a positive idea of others? So instead of saying people are different, we have nothing in common, what are some strengths do they have? And that takes a lot of strength to be able to really think about positive like aspects of other people that you're not familiar with. And that's where learning comes in, and researching and reading and thinking about other people and trying to figure out who are they and what strengths do they have. So as I begin to develop more self-awareness for myself, I then seek to find more knowledge about other people and begin to build. And this is again an ongoing process. Okay. So then we get to the point of cultural humility, and it takes time to build to that, to get to that level. I always say cultural competence and cultural humility is a continuum. You're always growing, always learning. And that's with anything. You have to cultivate it. It's with, if you have a relationship, if you, whatever the case may be, you have to always cultivate whatever it is that you're working on to make it grow and to make it better and to learn. So cultural humility isn't the end point. It's just a point of thinking outside of, okay, so now I'm aware of myself and now I understand the strengths of others. What can I do to input myself in this situation to help once I see that I don't really like the treatment of other people? I don't think something is equitable. I don't think something is fair. So what can I do as a human being to interject or to start to create some real change? So one very positive thing to do is understanding and redressing power imbalances. How can I use my understanding of my own and others' cultures to identify and work to disrupt inequitable systems? And I know some of you may be thinking, I'm nowhere near at that point yet, but the whole goal is to grow, because again, we're on a continuum of growth and trying to reach a point that we can actually make change in society, hopefully. And that would hopefully be a mindset of many, especially parents, because it is important to the growth of our society to make sure that we are living in a cohesive manner. And then finally, holding systems accountable. How can I work on an institutional level to ensure that the systems I'm part of move toward greater inclusion and equity? And when we get to our 10 tips for teaching and talking to your children about race, you're going to see a lot of examples of cultural humility as well as cultural competence and ways that they can show up for you as parents, and positive ways that you can help your children and introduce them to these topics, as well as having positive, necessary conversations about race. And always remember, again, that these are ongoing processes that change in response to new situations, experiences, and relationships. So just thinking about the cultural competence being the foundation, cultural humility being kind of that continuum of where you want to go and how you want to show up in the world, in terms of being a more culturally competent person. So now let's look at them side by side to see how we're developing and gaining that knowledge. So when we're in the process of developing, we again work towards developing our own cultural self-awareness. So I mentioned this before, and I know some of you may be thinking, okay, so how do I do that? Well, here's that action piece. Becoming aware of your own cultural norms, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So what is it about myself that's normal to me? Okay, so what is it that I think, okay, this is how people maybe should be, or this is what I consider a norm. So take that and identify and examine your own personal biases and your stereotypes and prejudices. Do I believe this because this person is that? And that is actually a conversation that I've had with myself. So I believe this person is this because of that. So that's a good way to really begin to kind of challenge yourself to think about how you are showing up as an individual in terms of having your own prejudices and and stereotypes that you may have in your mind. Because unfortunately, a lot of that comes out of ignorance. And I know oftentimes when we hear the word ignorance, it seems like a very negative word, but a state of ignorance is just a state of not knowing. And if you don't know that you may be saying, or your children may be saying, or you may be encountering situations that are culturally or racially offensive, then you'll never know until, if we go back and revisit that foundation, until we examine ourselves and become more self-aware of how we are showing up and what we believe, every day, in our everyday life. And then finally, considering the impact cultural differences might have on your interactions with diverse groups of people. So again, that self-examination, and as you go through and you begin to examine yourself and you begin to have those conversations, it's almost like a light bulb will go off in your head. And I, again, have been through this process and just thinking like, wow, I did think this. I am presenting myself like this. So what can I do so that I understand that I do have this kind of this baggage of with these assumptions that I've made and I've prejudged, and that's what a prejudice is, and I've prejudged someone. How can I show up differently, and how can I present myself as a better role model? And this again is not to say that anyone listening to this is that person. This is just some general information just to give you some foundational information to begin thinking about being more culturally competent. So when you get to the point of cultural humility, and humility sounds very humbling, right? And it is. So how can I go from developing, thinking about self-awareness, just kind of thinking about how I show up, and how do I gain that cultural knowledge? Well, first, you have to be comfortable with not knowing. You have to balance your expert knowledge with being open to learning from the community and their lived experience. One of the classes that I teach is History of World Religions, for example. And I was determined to teach that class. So when I created that class almost 10 years ago, I thought, I really don't know a lot about a lot of religions. I have to learn. So what I did is I input myself into the various communities for those religions and visited those places of worship and visited the religious leaders so that I could learn, so that I could be comfortable with not knowing and get to a place of learning from the experts so that I could be the very best religions teacher that I could be and show up as someone with information because I learned from someone else. So put yourself in positions of not knowing and not being the expert, knowing something maybe, but really being in a position where you have to learn. I mean, that is the highest form of humility. And then being curious about other cultures, asking questions, reading text about other cultures, viewing films and documentaries, and studying other language, and attending classes and workshops, being intentional about that. If you know there's an event going on that is focused on a particular group of people that you're not quite familiar with, then take that class, read that book. Everything's at our fingertips. We are living in a time now where we don't have to be in a state of not knowing. We can seek out information, we can share information, we can ask for information and get it right away. So just being curious about other cultures and putting yourself in a position to learn. Attending cultural events and festivals. Another class that I teach is History of Ethnic and Gender Studies. So when I created that class, I thought, I don't know a lot about a different ethnic groups, in one group in particular, Arab Americans. So I began to visit the Arab American Museum, attend different events, and learn the culture, learn the language, and just immerse myself in that. And again, being a little uncomfortable initially because I didn't know a lot, but learning and gaining so much valuable information that as a mother and as an educator and as a person, I now can show up as someone with information about Arab Americans, and I kind of disabuse myself of a lot of the ignorance that I had because I put myself in a place of not knowing so that I can learn from experts. And then finally, one good piece of gaining that cultural humility is establishing trusting relationships with community confidence or connectors who are able to provide insights into cultural norms, family practices, communication styles, and traditions. And I'm going to talk about in a moment how, yes, there are differences within race, and you can't really say, okay, if you meet one person of this race, that is how they behave. But I think there's a lot of power in at least knowing people and having interactions with people from different groups so that you have that experience as a human being, and it makes you just a more well-rounded person. So developing that cultural competence and gaining, it helps you gain that cultural humility that can lead you and help you get to the path of being a more culturally competent person. So I think those are all very important ideas to consider. So now what I'd like to do is look at how this shows up for our children. I know oftentimes we're looking for like that magic pill or that magic book to read or video clip to watch or whatever the case may be. And that's not what I'm here to do, because I think a lot of the work in learning about being culturally competent and also learning about race is really a lot of self-work that you can think about for yourself once you realize where you are, once you become aware of where you are. But I think as a parent with children, it's really important to try to establish the most solid foundation to help them be as culturally competent in the beginning as much as possible. So I'd like to offer just 10 tips. They're not my tips, but they're tips I discovered a few years ago, and I think they're amazing. I share them as often as I can because I think they work. And I think they're valuable and they can really help in thinking about teaching and talking about race.
Michelle, I just want to say, I think it's so fascinating that you started the presentation by having us kind of examine our own beliefs and where we're at as parents before you dove into how parents can teach their children. So that's really got me thinking, and I'm sure some of you may have questions in this next part of the program as well. So I just want to encourage you to put those in the chat as we go so we can make sure we can get those to Michelle.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrea. So this is a document that you can get from momsrising.org. It's called Embrace Race. And I enjoy this so much because I think all of these tips are so valuable and can really help parents who maybe are uncomfortable with talking about race and various issues around race. And if you have the opportunity, check out momsrising.org. They consider themselves a transformative multicultural organization, and they have over 1 million members who are devoted to just making sure that racial diversity and equity and social justice are on the forefront of moms' minds. So that's why I love this so much, because it keeps mothers in mind and parents in general, I would say. So just quickly, and I'm going to try not to read to you verbatim, and you can always go back in the presentation and look at this document, or again, visit momsrising.org to find the 10 tips for teaching and talking to kids about race. First and foremost, start early. Um, Let your child know that it's perfectly okay to notice skin color and talk about race. Start talking about racial differences and what they mean and what they don't mean. Don't shy away from it. If your child wants to know why someone has brown skin and they have white skin, it's okay to say, you know what, we that is true. You know, we have different skin color. It's beautiful to have brown skin and to have white skin. Instead of just like saying, be quiet, don't notice the color. And that makes it take on race, take on a negative tone, like it's something bad to be ashamed of. And so I know I have experienced oftentimes in my life with my daughters are 18 and 14, but when they were little, they would often have their hair braided, and I'd have beads at the end and beautiful barrettes and different things. And a lot of the white children were fascinated. They'd run up and they'd want to touch the beads, and they'd say, "Oh, your hair's so pretty." And the moms were so embarrassed, and they'd get them away and say, "Well, don't mention that." And I would go right in and say, "Nope, come back. Yeah, your hair is braided. Don't you love it? Now, maybe you shouldn't grab anyone's hair, but how about we just talk about these beads and barrettes, and I'll tell your mom where you can buy them." But that's me being comfortable in my space to say that. But that's me coming in as a parent and letting that child and that mom know it's okay for them to notice hair and have questions, but maybe not okay to touch, people's hair, but just having some conversations about differences early on. So I have found that to be a positive situation because I'm not making it as if it's a negative thing. And that's just my personal example and experience. Number two, encourage your children to ask questions, share observations and experiences, and be respectfully curious about race. I love those words, being respectfully curious. So expose your child to different cultural opportunities, photographs, films, books, or cultural events, and discuss them after. You don't have to be an expert on race to talk with your child. And I think oftentimes people think, well, I'm not an expert. You don't have to be an expert to talk about race. You can take little steps to let your children know this is a safe space. So when you're 15, 16, or 17, you're not completely terrified at the thought of, talking about race, because it's something that's been embedded in who you are. A third tip is be mindful. What kids hear from us is less important than what they see us do. And again, going back to what I said earlier, you are a role model to your child. What you say is important, what you do, the diversity of your friendship circle, for example, will likely have a bigger impact. And if your child doesn't attend a diverse school, then intentionally go out to find after school or weekend activities such as sport leagues, books and toys that include different races and ethnicities. For me, with two Black daughters, I always made sure that they had dolls that looked like them, as well as dolls that did not look like them. I always made sure they had books that were like mirrors of themselves, but also books that were windows so they could see other perspectives. Because it was very important to me as a mom and an educator for my girls to have a well-rounded view of the world. So just being mindful of that. Face your own bias. That's a big one. I think that's terrifying to hear, face your own bias, because a lot of us think, well, I don't have a bias. Well, we all do. I have them, you have them, everyone has them. It's just human nature. So let your child see you acknowledge and face the own biases that you may have. We're less likely, pardon me, to pass them on if we identify and work to overcome them. So it's perfectly fine at an age appropriate, when they're age appropriate, to give them an example of a bias, racial or otherwise, that you hold or have held, and share with your child things you do to confront and overcome that bias. And that goes back to the whole idea that cultural competence, challenging your own beliefs, looking at yourself, because a journey of learning about race and being cultural competent, that's personal, that's for you. It's not for anyone else to really judge you or tell you where you need to be. You know from yourself, just from looking at your own, who you are, where you are, and how you want to proceed in your life. Number 5, know and love who you are. This isn't a time to say, well, because I'm a part of the majority as opposed to the minority, you know, I feel awful about myself. It's not about that. You can't love anyone else if you don't love yourself. So talk about the histories and experiences of your own racial and ethnic and cultural groups that your family identifies with. Talk about their contributions and acknowledge the less flattering parts of those histories as well. So tell stories that about the challenges your family experienced. Let your children know about their backgrounds in history. Also, by interjecting that of others, you learn more as well. So know and love who you are. That is so extremely important to do as well. Number 6, racial cultural literacy. So develop some cultural literacy by learning about, and Andrea, there's someone who needs to be admitted into the room. Do you want me to admit him or?
Got it.
There we go. I didn't want to leave him like lingering there. So I apologize. So number 6, racial cultural literacy. Develop racial cultural literacy by learning about and respecting others. So it's okay to study and talk about the histories and experiences of groups. I know if any of you are around my age, back in the day, I don't think I'm that old, but we would have to go through an encyclopedia to learn information. We had all the volumes and sets of encyclopedias. But now, again, we're in the information age. So a lot of that information we can find right online. So the information is there. And if we do the work to find out, we can find out a lot of good information, especially on reliable sites that are like a .edu, a .org. Stay away from Wikipedia. And you can find a lot of valuable information, and also through trusted organizations and sites committed to social justice, you can find a lot of good information. So be sure that your child understands that every racial and ethnic group includes people who believe different things and behave in different ways. So it's important to remember that there's a lot of diversity within groups as there are across them. So understanding that one person's lived experience may be different than another person's lived experience, even though they're of the same racial group and ethnicity. Be honest. Be honest with your child in an age-appropriate way about bigotry and oppression. We don't want to throw big words out. I think that's another thing that scares even adults. When we start throwing these big words out and, you know, you don't really understand what they mean. So I think you have to meet people where they are. And again, going back to what I said earlier, developing that cultural competence to see where you are. And then from that point, growing. So be honest with your child in age-appropriate ways about bigotry and oppression, and don't throw big words and ideas at them, but introduce it in a way that is age appropriate. And we do that all the time as parents. My children now are 22, 18, and 14. And so the way I talk about topics with them now isn't how I taught them topics and had conversations at 2 and 3 years old about being nice, sharing, not being mean to people. So the kind of message is the same, but it grows in terms of what those ideas are that are involved. So children are amazing at noticing patterns, including racial patterns, for example. So be sure that your child knows that the struggle for racial fairness is still happening and that your family can take part in that struggle. And what that looks like for your family is, again, this is personal. Maybe it's reading a certain book, watching movies, becoming more aware for yourself. Maybe it's being an activist. It's totally up to where your family and where your children are personally. It's not for anyone to tell you where you should be. So that's important to think about as well. I especially love to tell stories, lift up freedom fighters, for example, tell stories of resistance and resilience. Every big story of racial oppression is also a story about people fighting back and speaking truth to power. Include women, children, and young adults. So empower them at a young age. And more importantly, just make sure that you're telling the stories to everyone, not that you're telling stories about girls to only stories of girls, but telling boys boys, stories about girls, and vice versa, just so children get a well-rounded view and understanding of differences in people, as well as the importance of understanding that we can live in a cohesive manner. Be active. Don't be a bystander on race. Help your child understand what it means to be and how to be a change agent. Whenever possible, connect the conversation you're having to the change you and your child want to see, and to ways to bring about that change. I know a lot of this sounds scripted, but I think moving through in a positive, intentional way is definitely helpful and useful, especially if it's not like a naturally comfortable thing. Even for me, just talking about race and maneuvering through with my own children isn't like, very comfortable all the time. You have to have sometimes those uncomfortable conversations to get to a place of learning. And then finally, going back to what I said earlier, plan for a marathon and not a sprint. It's okay to say, I'm not sure, or let's come back to that later, but then do come back to it. So make race talks with your child routine. Race is a topic you should plan to revisit again and again in many different ways over time. If it's only coming up on Dr. King's birthday or during Black History Month, then it loses its meaning and its understanding. And you think, okay, we've talked about it for this month and that's it. So if it's something that is, naturally being brought in via these tips that I've shared with you, I think that we can solve all the world's problems. No, I'm just kidding. I think we can have we can have a society of very well-rounded and open-minded children who understand the importance of living in a culturally competent world and can maneuver and be culturally competent people based upon intentionally thinking about others in the world in terms of diversity. So I really, again, like those 10 tips. And if you want to visit momsrising.org and embrace race, they're good resources to help you think about this topic as well. And then also 2 other resources I'd like to share with you. Talking About Race article, I really like this one. It does a really good job with giving advice on how to talk about race. And then finally, there are 21 anti-racism videos to share with kids. And I know anti-racism is kind of the word being anti-racist. And what anti-racist is basically saying is it's not enough to say, I'm against racism. It's the encouragement to be actively involved. And if you think back to, I think, slide number 2 for cultural competency, all of those words were action words: understanding, encouraging, and trying to be intentionally a part of conversations and actions to help others. That's how you can be anti-racist. And reading stories, telling histories, having conversations, those are all steps to being anti-racist, and they're more actionable things, as opposed to saying, I like everyone, I respect everyone. Yeah, but it takes a little bit more than that. So I think these videos are really great to share with kids. And I know there are teachers at times who want to share videos, but it's a very touchy subject. But I'm hopeful that one day that race is something that is a conversation at home, so that when it is brought up in school, it's not brought up in a way as if someone's trying to put their beliefs on children, but it's something that we're all having a conversation about and how important it is. And I think these 21 racism videos do a really good job with that. So I just have one more thing for you to view, and then I'd love to take some questions. I have a really short video clip that is a great entry point to discuss cultural competence and to begin conversations about race with your children. So I'd like to show you this very short clip, and then after that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have or comments. Thanks. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and I have to stop sharing to do a new share. Let's see. And I need to share with sound. That's always a trap, okay. And this video is only 2 minutes long. Oh, where'd it go? Let's see, here we go. Andrea, can you see my screen, how to talk to kids about race?
Yep, you got it.
Okay, perfect.
Race is one of those touchy subjects you don't really want to get into because you're afraid you might mess up. But the fact is that as early as 3 years old, children are classifying people based on their appearances. And so the worst conversation adults can have with kids about race is no conversation at all. Talking to kids about race needs to happen early, often, and honestly. Saying honestly, yeah, people are different, cultures are different, but that's a good thing. How boring would it be to have a crayon box that all had the same color? There are so many ways to approach racial conversations. You can use Dr. Seuss books, you can use any sort of pop culture reference. There are many, many movies, animated movies especially, that form a good entryway. So it's helpful, especially as a parent, to watch the movie beforehand maybe, or read a plot summary and say, well, what's happening here? Or look at all the other princesses. What do you notice about them? Do you think anyone can be a princess? Do they have to have a certain skin color or look a certain way? And it's usually good to sort of stop along the way, pause 2 or 3 times strategically, and bring up this conversation. Kids, just like adults, don't just respond to words. So this isn't just quote unquote talking to your kids about race. This is actually experiential learning that we need to do. I remember taking a class to the Lorraine Motel where Dr. King was assassinated. And when young people see that, that impacts them. And then we can use that experience, that hands-on, visceral encounter with race and racism, to have a much more substantive conversation, and it feels different. And you can do that in your own local city. There are historical markers, those signs you pass all the time and never read. Stop and read them one day. See what they say, see what happened there, see if you recognize the names, or if you don't, go and look them up. Utilize all the resources around you and make sure that you're not just talking to your kids about race and diversity and justice, but you're showing them why it's important. Racism is detrimental to the entire society, no matter if you're black or white, Latino, Asian, Native, whomever. Everyone is impacted, and that's why we need to raise a generation of people that's going to turn around and try to change that momentum toward the tide of anti-racism and racial justice.
Okay, well, thank you. And that's all I have for you. And I just like to, if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk to you if you like. If not, I won't force you, but I am here to have a conversation if you like.
Well, thank you. I was hoping to ask a question.
Oh, sure.
All right, so my name is Michael, and I have a 8-year-old who loves reading, and I was wondering if you had good resources. She responds incredibly well to stories about girls, which, you know, shouldn't be much of a surprise. And it's really caused me to reevaluate a lot of the books I grew up with, which, like Tolkien, have almost no women of consequence. And so I want to make sure that, you know, she's exposed to more and more stories with diversity. And I was curious where you would recommend looking for lists of books that she should be reading.
Oh, there are a lot of great online sources, and I'm happy, and I can actually share it with this presentation too. I'd like to send you a site with a lot of different books in it for you that you can pass on to your daughter. So there are a lot of different social justice sites, as well as anti-racist sites as well, that offer wonderful book selections for all different topics. So I think the best thing for me to do is, if you don't want to Google, I can send you some direct links and sites for you to take a look at, so that you can get that little princess all the books that she like with different diverse girls. Girl power is very important, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm happy to Google. It's just I'm pretty sure that the number of resources out there is more than I can count. So I was hoping
Yeah.
for your expert guidance.
Absolutely. And I do have a ton of sites that I continue. I don't know the names of the sites, but I can go as soon as we're off the presentation and I can send them your way as soon as
Okay.
possible so that you can have that information. Yeah, and Andrea put my email address in the chat, but if you can put your
Okay,
email
great.
address there, I'll email you right away. And I'm hopeful soon. The goal is to get a site up in the district for different resources for diversity and equity. And I'm hopeful that, and I know we're blaming everything on COVID, but seriously, it has caused a delay in a lot of things. So we're hopeful to get that site up. And so that is something that we're going to have in the district, but I will get you something tonight for you to look at. And I think you'll enjoy the different options. Thank you, Mr. Nye. I see your email address right there.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. And I had another question for you. This is much more specific. So there's probably not any general answer. But I was helping my 5-year-old with Zoom yesterday, and he said, "Oh, Dad, hey, there's the black girl in our class." And I was trying to figure out what the right reaction is. And I'm very glad that I don't think he has any negative prejudices, despite the best efforts of my parents. And I'm just curious how to encourage that without trying to draw too much attention to it.
No, I think that's great. What I would say not to do is to say, oh, no, don't say she's a black girl, but just acknowledge that and say, oh, awesome. Look at that. We have some diversity in the class. You have a black student in your class. That's cool. You know, do you know her? Have you had the opportunity to meet her? Maybe you should introduce yourself. So I would never shy away from the fact that he said she's black. I would just acknowledge that and just say, you know, that's awesome that we have diversity and encourage him to be friends with her.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think so. I think that's my general inclination, and I want to make sure though that I'm not, I don't know, doing the white knight that says, "Oh, look, there's one black in your class, so you better be friends with her." I'm trying to figure out is that the right approach, or is that trying too hard?
No, I don't think you're being the white knight. I don't think it's trying too hard. I think it's being, a sincere person who cares about other people and who's interested in meeting other people. And I don't think you're trying to be a savior. I think you're just being a nice person and introducing himself, acknowledging that there's someone different is so great in such a positive way. And I would say, I like your reaction, and I like that your reaction wasn't, don't say that. Oh no, that's a bad thing to say that she's, she's a black girl. But
Sure. Yeah.
I would definitely encourage, if he wants to, a friendship or an opportunity to say hello and not to treat her like she doesn't exist, but, and just see if there's a friendship there. There may not be. He's a boy, she's a girl. They're at probably that age where I don't know if boys and girls really like to play with each other at that age. But I think your response was good and just, acknowledging that. And I'm happy that he saw that and it wasn't something that was negative to him, but it's like, oh, okay, this is a good thing. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay,
And I'm
well, thank
sorry
you. I
that you
appreciate
said
it.
about your parents, their best efforts. I'm sorry to hear that. So it
Oh my
sounds like
goodness.
you're trying to go the opposite way, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you attending this evening too.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's I can get into that more with my therapist.
Oh, yeah.
But it's interesting to see the spectrum of people who are such nice people, and they treat their family so nicely, and they treat all the people that look like them so nicely, and yet they're so quick to judge anyone that's not in their immediate circle. All right,
Yeah.
that's it for me.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. And I'll get those resources to you tonight. They're right at my fingertips.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Michelle. I had a question.
Yes.
This is Margaret. I have a 15-year-old sophomore in the high school. And I was just wondering, just from your experience, he's very race conscious. He's Latino and he's very race conscious. And it sounds like his friends, they talk a fair amount about race, but I was just wondering if you could give me a larger context for that. I mean, do you find on the high school level that it's kids are fairly open to discussing race and diversity. They're not reticent, even though maybe some of their parents are. But I mean, I was just curious what your experience is.
Um, you know what? It all depends, and I have to definitely frame this through the lens in which the kids that I teach and I'm around, I teach a lot of diverse classes. So and I also advise a pretty large diversity club. So those kids in those groups, we're always having these conversations.
Right.
So outside of that, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
I'm sure they're having those conversations. How those conversations are going, I can't really speak to that. But I
Right.
do
It's a big
think,
school.
yeah, but I do think children are definitely curious. And I think
Mhm.
they are having, conversations about their thoughts and feelings. And especially if your son is, did you say your son is Hispanic?
Latino, yeah,
He's Latino?
Hispanic,
Sorry,
Latino. Yep.
Latino.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So if your son is Latino, I'm sure that he is, probably noticing that a lot of kids in the school don't look like him. So I'm
Right.
sure
Right.
he may be in a position where he is thought about as being the expert. So, and I'm just making some generalizations here, but so I'm going to throw a question back to you. Do you feel that he is being put in a position where he is being asked to be like the expert on being Latino? Is that kind of like why you're
Yeah.
framing this? Do you think that a lot of the students are coming to him to find information and just seek clarification, or do you feel that they are
Well,
saying things that are maybe culturally or racially insensitive? So I guess I
mhm.
just want a little bit more of.
Yeah, actually, just the opposite. It's kind
Okay.
of when he describes to me sometimes, the conversations he has, and he has a number of Hispanic Latino friends, and they're very, I don't want to say casual, but they're very kind of, realistic, upfront, matter of fact about, race and its impact on social interactions. So it was just interesting to me, and I was wondering if it was just his little, sort of cohort of students, or if this was a larger phenomenon that kids are pretty with it in terms of, and that's the sense I'm getting. The
Well,
kids at Lake Orient, it's your good work that you're doing in your
oh,
at the school, but it just seems like that they're pretty with it in terms of acknowledging, difference, not necessarily dwelling on it, but acknowledging it and sort of thinking through its impact and that kind of thing. So
well, I'm happy that he's had that experience and you've had those observations. But I would definitely say, and I don't want to be one of those people, but I'm going to say it. I
right,
think with social media, and I think
right,
with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think a lot of that in the past couple of months in a pandemic and people kind of being having that information around them, constantly. And I think a lot of that has influenced our children greatly. I know I've seen it firsthand with my own children and then with children that I've taught at our high school and different high schools. I think we're seeing a lot of people exposed to information and learning that they've never had before because of the recent
yeah,
events. So I think what we're
right,
seeing is the aftermath of that. Now, would I say that a lot of kids in Lake
yeah,
Orion are just with it and racially aware? I don't think I would say that, but can we say that children and
yeah,
teenagers are more exposed and they have more information at their fingertips and maybe a greater understanding? Absolutely. But again, I don't want to speak for every
yeah,
single teenager, but I definitely have seen more of an awareness. And I personally think it's tied directly to the George Floyd murder, the Black Lives Matter movement, the various
right.
activism we've
Hmm.
seen, and some people have even been a part of. So we're witnessing the aftermath of that, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this has been a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. And this is my plug for cultural outreach. Your son or anyone, it doesn't have, they can be white, black, a Latino, whatever the case may be. They're welcome to join cultural outreach because we're always moving towards having those conversations. One of the best events we've had is cookies and conversations. At first, I thought it was just so the kids could get the sweets, but it actually did end up being wonderful, thoughtful, meaningful conversations about race and different matters in the high school. Of course, the cookies were to entice them, but I think the conversation is what kept them engaged. So we are looking to continue to have these conversations, and we had a lot of great ideas, just riding on the wave of a lot of the awareness that happened. But, and again, I hate to be that person, but COVID and pandemic kind of set us behind with that, but they're welcome to
No, I mean,
join and be a
those are
part
the
of it.
realities. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, those are the realities that we live with. And 2020 has just been an extraordinary year. So, in so many ways.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah,
when we get
thank
back
you.
into the swing of things, you let him know if they'll see me advertising and things. They're welcome to be a part of it because I love to hear from different perspectives, the open-minded and maybe not so much open-minded, just coming together and having those conversations to push our thinking forward and also to build some bridges that may be in place. So I'm always looking for that. I don't shy away from the difficult conversations or people with different perspectives and opinions. I mean, that's the great part about being an American, right? That we all have different perspectives and points of view. But I
Right.
think conversation can help us, create some of those social bonds to bring us together.
Right. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's anyone else have any questions or comments before we wrap up for the evening? Okay, Andrea.
Well, I just want to thank you, Michelle, for your time and expertise tonight. I think we all agree this was very informative and enlightening, and it got me thinking about things in a whole new way for myself and my own children. So I hope we can do more of this in the future.
I do too. So this is part one. So we got to do a part two to keep our thinking going, right? Then a part three, then a part four. We'll see. But thank you,
Series.
everyone. Yes, series. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate it. And Mr. Nye, I'm going to get that information to you as soon as the meeting is over.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank
Yes,
you.
have a lovely night.
Thank you. And happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays.